May 2026 was one of the strongest months at the box office in over a decade, with more than $1 billion crossing the domestic ticket counter and AMC reporting its highest attended May since 2019. And somehow, a horror film made for under $1 million and a movie based on a 4chan internet joke outgrossed a Star Wars film that cost $165 million. That is not a typo. A creepypasta from the depths of the internet beat the most recognizable franchise in Hollywood history, and the numbers are entirely real. Today, we're ranking 9 films that carried every reason to succeed and didn't, across one of the strangest months the industry has produced in years. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the one that's going to sting for Disney for a long time. Jon Favreau directed it, Pedro Pascal carried it, Disney spent $165 million producing it, and the result was the lowest grossing opening in the entire Disney-era Star Wars franchise, 12 films deep into the most aggressively protected IP in Hollywood. That second weekend collapsed 69%, which is worse than Solo, a Star Wars story's infamous drop, and by the end of May, the worldwide gross sat at around $246 million nominal against that $165 million production budget, with marketing costs sitting entirely outside that figure. Break even on a film of this scale, once you account for the exhibitor's cut and the marketing spend, lands somewhere north of $400 million, and it isn't getting there. Here's the thing though, the film isn't bad by most critical measures, which makes the result harder to explain on pure quality grounds. It exists in a strange middle ground where audiences weren't hostile, they were just indifferent, and 3 seasons of Din Djarin and Grogu were already available for free on Disney Plus before a single ticket was sold. Asking people to pay theatrical prices for what felt like a very expensive season 4 premiere was always going to be a tougher sell than Disney's marketing department appeared to appreciate. One outlet calculated the second weekend drop at 72%, and Deadline ran a line that cut through all the noise in a single sentence. Star Wars fans weren't asking for this movie. That's the whole review, really. Overseas, the picture was slightly kinder, with the film opening above Solo across several European markets. But domestically, a $165 million Star Wars release getting beaten by a Blumhouse horror film made for fractions of that cost is the kind of result that reshapes how studios greenlight franchise content going forward. That reshaping won't be a comfortable process for anyone at Disney. Mortal Kombat II is the one I was genuinely rooting for. The 2021 reboot was imperfect but understood the assignment completely. Blood, mythology, fan service, and a cast that committed to the material. The sequel doubled down on all of it, with Simon McQuoid returning to direct, Jeremy Slater writing the script, and the roster expanding to include Carl Urban as Johnny Cage alongside returning players like Hiroyuki Sanada, Joe Taslim, and Louis Tan, with principal photography running from June 2023 at Village Roadshow Studios on Queensland's Gold Coast. The production budget came in at $80 million, confirmed across multiple sources, and the break-even threshold, accounting for marketing and theatrical revenue splits, sat at roughly $200 million. Worldwide nominal gross, as of early June 2026, landed at approximately $126 million, leaving a gap of around $74 million between where it needed to be and where it finished. Opening weekend delivered $38.5 million domestically from 3,503 theaters, which was good enough for second place behind The Devil Wears Prada sequel, but the film then dropped 65% in week 2, fell another 67% by week 3, and was largely gone from multiplex screens within a fortnight, physically displaced by Mandalorian booking dominance, eating up available auditoriums. Mortal Kombat co-creator Ed Boon did get 2 cameos in the film, including one as a bartender, so at least somebody had an uncomplicated good time with this production. The 2021 original succeeded partly because Warner Bros. Released it simultaneously on HBO Max during a period when theatrical attendance was still constrained by pandemic conditions, and the novelty of seeing the franchise's extreme violence rendered in live action with genuine production value was a real draw at that moment. The sequel had neither the simultaneous streaming launch nor the novelty factor working in its favor, and the audience felt that absence. On inflation-adjusted figures, Mortal Kombat II is barely keeping pace with the 1995 original's nominal gross, while that 1995 film is worth around $266 million in today's money. The franchise is running hard to stay in the same place. This one is actually kind of sad because Pressure carried genuine craft and a cast that should have generated real mainstream curiosity. Anthony Maris directed, and the story itself covers the meteorologists whose weather forecast determined whether the D-Day landings could proceed, which is legitimately compelling material that most audiences know nothing about. Andrew Scott, Brendan Fraser, Kerry Condon, Chris Messina, and Damian Lewis headlined the cast. Focus Features picked it up as a negative acquisition from Studio Canal, and it opened to $5.75 million from 1,829 theaters on May 29th. Scott's profile had risen sharply following All of Us Strangers, and Fraser carried genuine goodwill from his Oscar win for The Whale, so you would expect that combination to pull in a crowd beyond the core art house demographic. What it produced instead was a quiet release into a marketplace already saturated by Mandalorian screen dominance and Memorial Day competition swallowing available attention. Timing in theatrical distribution is not just a logistics question, it is a strategic one, and someone got the strategy badly wrong here. A different calendar slot might have told a completely different story for this film. The Breadwinner is the audience versus critics case study of May 2026, and the numbers tell a genuinely split story. Nate Bargatze plays a husband who agrees to become a stay-at-home father when his wife lands a deal on Shark Tank. Sony released it on May 29th into the Memorial Day corridor on a $25 million production budget, and it opened fifth with $7.5 million domestically, while audiences awarded it an A- cinema score, and Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it 28%. The promotional effort around the release was genuinely unusual by studio standards, with Cinemark running 25% discounts under a campaign branded The Nate Rate, and AMC offering special matinee pricing. That kind of exhibitor-level promotional intervention does not happen unless both studios and theater chains are nervous about the numbers ahead of opening weekend. Bargatze's core audience showed up, tracking at 85% approval in non-coastal markets, according to Deadline figures, but 85% regional approval combined with a 28% critical score, and Memorial Day competition produces a modest opening that a $25 million budget can survive without celebrating. The fans came, there just weren't quite enough of them to change the result. Where The Breadwinner split its audience and critics cleanly down the middle, I Love Boosters delivered unanimous critical enthusiasm and still couldn't find the crowd. Boots Riley directed, the cast brought together Keke Palmer, Taylor Page, Poppy Liu, Isa Gonzalez, and Naomi Ackie, and critics awarded it 92% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Neon released it into 1,750 theaters on May 22nd, and the film earned $3.7 million over 3 days, extending to $4.67 million across the 4-day frame, with a cinema score of B, which is solid for the genre but not the crossover signal that turns critical momentum into mainstream box office legs. Riley's previous film, Sorry to Bother You, earned $4.2 million in its second frame during summer 2018 and topped out at $17.4 million domestic total, and I Love Boosters is tracking along a very similar trajectory in nominal terms. That parallel is a ceiling, not a floor. A 92% critics score in a month throwing $80 million tentpoles at the wall should theoretically convert into something bigger than this, but the film got swallowed by the sheer noise level of Memorial Day weekend competition, and Neon's distribution footprint simply cannot compete for screens when Mandalorian is commanding the multiplex. The critical community loved it. The calendar beat it. Some context matters here before calling this one a straightforward disaster. The Sheep Detectives, Amazon MGM's animated family mystery, accumulated $54.5 million domestically across 4 weekends, dropping 50% in the fourth week to $4.6 million from 2,810 theaters, and preview screenings brought in just over $1 million ahead of an opening that had been projected at $12 million to $15 million. The opening missed those projections by a considerable margin, which is where the story gets complicated. Animated family films need runway in a way that action tentpoles do not, relying on word-of-mouth building across multiple weekends from a parent audience that books tickets differently from the opening night crowd. When that runway gets compressed by tentpole competition on both sides of the calendar slot, the accumulation strategy breaks down before it gets started. The production budget for The Sheep Detectives has not been confirmed across multiple reliable sources, so the full loss picture remains unclear. But $54.5 million over a full month for an animated studio release at whatever this film likely cost to produce represents a performance that falls well short of where Amazon MGM needed it to land. Where The Sheep Detectives faded gradually, Passenger collapsed quickly and without much warning. Paramount's thriller reached $15.3 million nominal total after 2 weekends from 2,534 theaters, with a second weekend drop of 70% that left very little room for optimism about the back end of its run. The production budget has not been confirmed across 2 independent sources, so speculating on a specific loss figure would be getting ahead of the available data, but a 70% sophomore drop for a wide-release thriller communicates everything about the word of mouth it failed to generate. When audiences see a film on Friday night and do not tell anyone about it by Saturday morning, the Monday numbers reflect that silence precisely, and Passenger's Monday numbers were very quiet indeed. Black Bear's Tuner tells almost the inverse story of Passenger in terms of scale, but arrives at exactly the same destination. Released on May 22nd, Tuner opened in a limited platform release before expanding to 452 theaters in its second week, accumulating a total of $1.8 million nominal across both weekends combined, with $1.7 million of that figure coming from the expansion frame, including preview screenings. Platform expansion strategy rests on a specific assumption that enthusiastic early buzz in limited markets converts to wider audience demand that justifies the broader rollout. The per-screen average at expansion did not support further distribution. The film stalled at the first hurdle, and the strategy ran out of road. Some films are not built for wide theatrical release, and Tuner found that out 1 weekend too late to adjust course. And then there's this one. Billie Eilish is among the most commercially successful recording artists of her generation. Her audience is enormous and genuinely devoted, and her concert film, Hit Me Hard and Soft, The Tour, Live in 3D. Released by Paramount on May 8th, carried projections of $8 million to $10 million for opening weekend. Preview screenings brought in $2.2 million, and the final opening fell short of those projections. Concert films operate as short-window theatrical events by design, so the ceiling was always going to be constrained regardless of the artist involved. But missing an $8 million to $10 million target for a Billie Eilish theatrical event in 2026 is a data point that demands some honest reflection. The Taylor Swift Eras Tour film in 2023 redefined what concert theatrical could commercially look like, and in doing so, it created an expectation that subsequent concert releases have consistently failed to meet. Eilish is not Swift at the box office, and no amount of 3D formatting closes that commercial gap, particularly when 3D pricing inflates ticket costs and simultaneously contracts the potential audience. That trade-off did not work in 2026, and it probably will not work any better the next time a studio tries it with a different artist. May 2026 will be studied in studio development meetings for years, and not because the month itself failed. It did not fail overall. It was one of the biggest Mays in box office history on nominal figures. It will be studied because the films that won it were produced for almost nothing by first-time directors working from internet folklore, while $165 million franchise entries and prestige casts carrying decades of brand equity lost to them decisively. The pattern running through all 9 of these films is not one bad month or a string of bad luck. It is a structural shift in what theatrical audiences will actually pay to see, and legacy IP combined with famous faces no longer functions as the guarantee it once appeared to be. That argument has been circulating in the industry for years, but May 2026 made it impossible to dismiss any further. The gap between what Hollywood spent this month and what audiences chose to reward is exactly the kind of story this channel keeps digging into, because once you start looking for that pattern, you find it everywhere.